Hello everybody. As promised last time, today we're going to finish our little tour through our collection of paintings and illustrations of Union Steamship Company ships. First up is a steamer that was the first ocean-going vessel in the world to be built of mild steel, the Rotomahana. It was built in 1879 by William Denny and Brothers of Dumbarton. A fast ship, the Rotomahana would become known as the Greyhound of the Pacific. The painting is by English-born draftsman, engineer and artist Lewis Neville. Neville resided in New Zealand in the late 1870s and early 1880s, initially in Dunedin and then in Christchurch. He exhibited with both the Otago and Canterbury art societies and was also a keen sportsman who represented Dunedin at rugby. After heading back to the UK, he worked as an engineer on the construction of the Forth Bridge. In 1916 he came out to New Zealand again and lived in Timaru. It's said that he intended on going back to the UK, but the First World War prevented him from doing so, and he passed away in Timaru in 1919. Frank Barnes, who painted this later view of the Rotomahana, is believed to have been born in England and to have come here as a sailor, jumping ship and taking up residence in the Wellington region. He became a shepherd and from 1895 spent much of his life working on a rongorongo station and living alone in a musterer's hut. He painted vessels he saw through the window of the hut as they passed in and out of Wellington Harbour. Barnes lived a solitary life in his hut until he was in his early 80s. And then in 1941 the station owner paid for him to go and live in a Lower Hutt hotel. Later that year, Barnes broke an arm, developed pneumonia and passed away. The Rotomahana operated on the Wellington to Sydney route for about 15 years. Then from 1897 to 1907 worked as a Wellington to Lyttelton ferry. It spent the final years of its working life steaming between Melbourne and Launceston, until being laid up in 1920 and scuttled in Bass Strait in 1928. We've already covered the Union Company's worst shipping disaster, the sinking of the Tararua at Waipapa Point in April 1881 with the loss of 131 lives, in a previous episode of Talking Pictures. It's episode 19 if you missed it the first time, or fancy a second look. The company's second worst shipwreck came in 1894, when the Wairarapa, en route from Sydney to Auckland, with 170 passengers and a crew of 65, was off course, travelling fast in a thickening fog, and crashed into Great Barrier Island. Although some survivors made it to the island, 121 lives were lost. Amongst the dead were two Dunedin stewardesses, Charlotte MacDonald and Annie McQuaid. Chief Stewardess Charlotte MacDonald had been widowed 2 years earlier, when her husband had fallen overboard from the ship Manapuri and drowned in Otago Harbour. She had 4 children and an elderly mother to support. Assistant Stewardess Annie McQuaid had served out all the lifebelts, reserving one for herself, when a little girl in a nightdress made her way to her and hid in her skirt. Miss McQuaid took off the lifebelt she had saved for herself and put it around the child. Both were swept from the wrecked ship with the very next wave and were drowned. The Monowai was another vessel by William Denny and Brothers of Dumbarton. Built in 1890, it was the largest steamer constructed for the Union Steamship Company to that date. It was initially used on the Trans-Pacific route, and in 1894 made a record run from San Francisco to Auckland in just 31 days. The ship was laid up at Dunedin in 1920 and later became a breakwater at Gisborne. The Mahino was one of the finest vessels to work the Trans-Tasman route. After entering service in 1905, it would become a record holder for passages between Wellington and Sydney, Melbourne and Sydney, and Bluff and Hobart. During the First World War, the Mahino and the Marama, another Union Steamship Company trans-Tasman steamer, were chartered by the government and converted into hospital ships. The Mahino remained in the Union fleet until 1935, when it was sold as scrap to a Japanese company. When being towed from Australia to Japan, the Mahino broke adrift and became beached on Queensland's Fraser Island. That's it for this episode. See you next time, and thanks for watching.